On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors season from hell is officially, mercifully over. But based on the comments coming out of Media Day after the season, the vibes seem to be pretty good for a 25-win team.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, April the 15th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website, at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and of course, you can join us over on the Locked On Raptors Discord server where the season is over, and so that means we're debating the Jakob Poeltl trade again. Yes! Do it. Come and talk about the Jakob Poeltl trade. Again, a thing we just cannot stop talking about in the Discord. We also talk about less tedious stuff like food and movies and cool playoff basketball between competitive teams and all that good stuff. Come join us. This is a great little listener community we got building around the show. Again, link in the description of the podcast. Free to join as always. Of course, you can find the show wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend on your audio app of choice. It's very easy to go find the show and support it. You can also do it on video by going to YouTube and finding the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell so you get a heads up every single time the show is about to premiere or go live. We very much appreciate you for doing that because it strokes my ego and makes me feel good when there's more people in the chat when the show is premiering. Okay, today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Look, I got a competitive side, and that competitive side loves Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, let's get to it. Today, we are not reviewing two losses to the Miami Heat where the Raptors barely played anyone, because why would we waste our time doing that? The season is over. Your Toronto Raptors finished with a 25-57 record, and it was locker cleanout day down at OVO Center today for your Toronto Raptors. We got players talking today. Sounds like Darko Rajakovic is going to talk tomorrow, and TBD on when we'll hear from Masai Ujiri and or Bobby Webster with a season closing address. But here to break down what we heard from the players' side of things is our pal Vivek Jacob, Big V from Sportsnet and Raptors in 7, his Substack newsletter. Big V, lots of guys saying words in response to questions and, various amounts of meaning in those words, right?
Yes, as every end of season presser. And I think, we have some of the big takeaways lined up, but overall, I think after a season like that, everything is about sort of resetting, getting away from all the different distractions and transactions that transpired over the course of the season that, set you on this path that you are on right now, where it's like, okay, you have the clarity of what you want to achieve in the future. And so this summer is about, getting those ducks in a row.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this season definitely felt like, the type of year where 5-6 years from now you look back and say, ooh, like that was the beginning of something pretty cool there. Scottie Barnes took a leap. They got Quickley and Barrett on the team. Gradey Dick was in his rookie year and flashed some stuff. And, you'll look back at it probably more fondly than it feels like you look back on it in the moment. Because look, man, watching a team win 25 games, win 3 games since February, not a good time. And the first half of this season, while they won a few more games, also not a good time because of all the uncertainty that the front office invited into their house once again after not learning last year that, hey, big, giant uncertainty over important players coming into your season is not really a good thing for the whole vibes of everything. Didn't learn from that. Had the same issue to start this year. It felt nasty and unpleasant basically the entire time watching this, but I do think there are some kernels of excitement and some little seeds planted that in some time could make this season feel a little bit more just sort of like a turning of the page year as opposed to a full-on disaster show, which it felt like for long stretches here. Let's get into our biggest takeaway, shall we? What was your sort of overarching? We heard from Kelly Olynyk, Jakob Poeltl, Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett, Immanuel Quickley, and Gradey Dick today. All guys who we figure are going to be a big part of the plan or the part of the plans going into next season. Anything super notable come out of any of these guys in their various times spent talking into a mic in between long sort of downtime where I got to listen to entirely too much Sportsnet hold music in between these pressers.
Yeah, there was way too much of that, and I think they've got to figure out some type of ticker for when the next one's gonna be, so you can at least like try and plan it out because it's like you almost needed the music on so you knew when the next one was beginning.
Yep.
So that was the notes for next season in the end of season presser. But overall, big takeaway. I think it's hard to get away from the love for Darko and
Yeah.
the appreciation for everything that's been thrown his way. We talk about all the uncertainty that has loomed over the team, the different machinations of the roster that he's had to cope with. And I think there are a lot of positives that have emerged. And when you look at the individual player development, obviously he came in with that being his big reputation. And you look at a staff that was brought in that, whose experience is primarily on the developmental side. And you would like to think that we saw quite a few things with the young players, especially that leave you feeling good about what's to come in the years to come.
No doubt, man. I think, yeah, Darko is the big winner of today. He didn't even talk, but I think he is the big winner just because he seemed to come up every time, a Raptor wanted to gush about something or someone, and it was always in reference to Darko. Everyone seemed to reference, hey, like Darko's great. We talk about like stuff that's not just basketball, which sounds novel or like in strange. Like it does kind of sound strange for the NBA, considering the relationships a lot of these guys tend to have with coaches. We know what Nick Nurse was all about, right? I don't know if Nick Nurse was sitting down for life talks with guys during his last couple seasons in Toronto. Maybe if he had, things would have ended differently or not ended at all. But like it stands out that every single guy seemed to have some sort of glowing praise about just the guy that Darko is, about the type of interactions they have with him, about how much he loves them. Like that's been a word that's thrown around a lot this year with Darko. It's just the big old L word. He loves his guys, and it really does make you feel like, man, it would be nice if like everyone's boss was like this. How much more productive and happy would everyone be if everyone's boss was a Darko? He seems to kind of walk the walk and talk the talk when it comes to all that I think made him an interesting candidate in the summer. When you heard him talk on various platforms and podcasts and in his opening press conference and things like that, what guys like Desmond Bain and stuff like that have said about him and what kind of dude he is. It's the kind of guy who had never really had a negative word said about him. And it makes a lot of sense seeing in focus what he was able to do with this year's team. That's the locker room stuff. That's the kind of keeping the thing together and the chemistry on the rails. That's a hard thing to do when you win 25 games. But I also think there's a lot of interesting stuff when it comes to the tactics, right? The offense didn't perform super well. They were a bottom 10 offense, but they played the way that Darko wants to play. They instilled a system and executed it. And I certainly had a lot more fun watching Raptors offense this season than I have for many years, after years of just kind of watching mismatch ball and not a whole lot of playmaking or anything coming out of it. Obviously there are questions about what he can do with the defense going forward, but on top of just sort of being a really nice, lovable fellow, he does seem to have some pretty good basketball chops as well too, Novi.
100%. I think, when you see the way Kelly speaks about the offense and the way, he's just kind of come into a system and saying, oh, wow, this is something that you can't really predict or, account for if you're in opposition. And so I think the constant read and react situations that he's able to put this offense into, and the fact that there is so much ball movement, there is so much player movement, and it's nowhere near a finished product, right? In terms of what he wants to see out there on the court. I think that bodes really well. Obviously, we want to see big changes on the defensive end. That's probably where we want to see the most improvement. But, Rome wasn't built in a day, and to see the signs on the offensive end, I think that's a good first step. I think again, going back to the individual improvements, I think RJ is actually a big deal for me in
Mhm.
terms of his fit in the offensive system. And I say big deal in terms of a credit to Darko. I've seen some stuff about people saying, oh, he's away from playing with two other lefties and Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, and that kind of changes uh, the geometry of the court and whatnot. And I'm
Mhm.
sure there's some value in that. But at the same time, I also saw RJ Barrett play for Team Canada, and there wasn't a whole lot of lefties on that team. Um, so, and we saw largely the same player. And so I do
Yep.
think you have to give Darko a lot of credit for what's happened with RJ in a Raptors uniform. Yeah, I do think you have to come away from this season feeling very encouraged by what he's been able to do on the court, the way he's been able to connect with the players off the court. And yeah, call him Ted Lasovich.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's fantastic. I love it. I mean, it's terrible, but I like it anyway. Look, what was the mandate last summer when Darko was hired? It was get back to the
Bring
roots
back
of
the
the
vibes.
franchise. Exactly. Get back to the root of player development being sort of the core thing of what they do, and make everyone less mad at work all the time. Basically, were the things, and nailed it, knocked it out of the park. It's beautiful. You love it. And yeah, I think like the player development stuff, that feels real to me. Scottie Barnes, might have been destined for a leap anyway, but he took the leap under Darko Rajakovic. There has to be some credit thrown his way there. Or all the coaches who work with him. Gradey Dick went from unplayable player to guy who was one of their better players down the stretch. And yeah, that's damning with faint praise, but he was playing heavy minutes. He looked at home on an NBA floor, which was not a thing that was true for the first 2-3 months of his career. Read the Michael Grange piece about his, saving of his season and the development that went in there last week at Sportsnet. If you want more sort of insight into that. RJ Barrett, like you mentioned, like they just trimmed the fat out of his game entirely and said, hey, like this is how you're going to succeed. And he's just done that every single time he's played for the Raptors. It's like ridiculous how quickly they figured that out and how reliable it's been. Immanuel Quickley started off, a little bit bashful. Oh, I'm not going to shoot so much. No, shoot all you want. Take as many shots as you want. Oh, also now you're a lead guard because Scottie's out. So figure that out on the fly. And I think the steps we saw from Quickley in a short amount of time as a playmaker were pretty remarkable. The G League success stories, Jonte Porter before the whole Jonte Porter thing was an interesting one. Javon Freeman Liberty, I think, is tracking to be a pretty decent G League success story. The development machine just might be back. It's very exciting. Obviously, need more time to see it all come to fruition. But yeah, I am pretty thrilled with everything that was said today about Darko Rajakovic and just the general sort of season that he's had under extremely difficult circumstances, setting the Raptors up on a track for some success going forward. We'll come back on the other side, Big V, get into some other thoughts from media day. Scottie Barnes looking like a leader out there. The vibes in general, pretty good after a 25-win season. We'll get to all that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. And look, I love Monopoly. I am a big fan of the game, the classic board game, but I'm also very competitive at it to the point that my wife and my in-laws refuse to play with me. It doesn't happen. We get one time every 4 years, February 29th, the leap day, every 4 years. Well, they will let me play Monopoly with them. It's always very fun. We just played it a couple weeks ago. It was a blast, but it's a very fleeting thing. With Monopoly Go, you can play anytime. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends and family to get the most riches in the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your friends. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, charge other players rent for your iconic properties, and more. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put in a game face, and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Today's show is also brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time, the single best place to buy tickets for the sporting events that you want to go to. It's a wonderful thing. Check them out right now. Maybe you're trying to go to a baseball game. Blue Jays are back in town. They're on a homestand. They're playing decent ball. You want to go see the Blue Jays play in that brand new slick-looking stadium with the new build in Waterloo looking backstop with the weird bricks and stuff. You can go see that in person, baby, by going with Game Time and getting all of the sight lines and the views from your seat, new views from your seat with Jays games this year too, with the way they've changed the lower bowl. So you can get those sight lines with Game Time, have no question about what you're going to be seeing when you go to the game. Also, if you're a fan of a playoff team going into any of the playoffs and any of the sports, Leafs, for example, you want to save some bucks, you can do that with our promo code at Game Time as well. And it's a new promo code, Locked On NBA. So if you've used the old Locked On one, you can go and now use the Locked On NBA promo code and get 20 bucks off your first purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA for 20 bucks off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back at it here with Vivek Jacob, Big V from Sportsnet, from Raptors in 7, talking about end of season locker cleanout availability, baby. Let's get to some other takeaways. I'll give you the floor. Where else do you want to go with this, Big V? There's lots of stuff. Scottie Barnes had some interesting comments. RJ Barrett, on down the line. Where do you want to go next with your takeaways from Media Day?
I mean, why don't we go to Scottie? I think when Kelly obviously joked about him having some fragile hands, but beyond that, I think when you look at maybe the low point as far as leadership and habits and all that being, the way that OKC game ended, the way he walked off the court against the Spurs, if that was the low point, you look at the rest of the season, he really took that on the chin and course corrected. And I think especially after getting injured, to see him constantly engaged, talking to teammates, cheering for them, and again being encouraging, being positive, and even doing some coaching on the sidelines. I think you have to be very happy with the way that went down.
Yeah, I'm fully with you there. I was pretty happy with basically everything Scottie had to say. It's all pretty encouraging stuff. Hell, he even mentioned running pick and roll with Immanuel Quickley. Music to my ears. More of that, please. But yeah, the leadership stuff I think was pretty fascinating. He talked a lot about Garrett Temple and the effect Temple has had on him and just sort of teaching him the ins and outs of how to lead. And, he sort of commented on it becoming a lot more natural over time with Garrett Temple being a really big part of that. And I thought there was a really interesting response that kind of showed like an extra layer of the insight into this when he was asked about sort of what he's learned about being a leader. And he talked about, kind of having a different approach with everyone he deals with. Everyone kind of has their own beats and rhythms and best way to sort of get stuff across. And I think that's just like a pretty mature thing for a 22-year-old in a leadership position, just kind of figuring it all out to kind of already have in sort of his philosophy on how to lead. Like that's like people write books about that type of stuff, right? Like that's like, pop psychology leadership books will tell you about that stuff all the time. And it's like real. Like, I don't know, I live it in my job every day. Like you gotta, if you're dealing with people, you manage people, you're leading people, you gotta have a different approach and kind of know how each and every person ticks. And the fact that Scottie Barnes seems to already grasp that at 22 is really damn encouraging. I think it would have been really easy for that OKC game, followed by the injury not long after that, to sort of be a sour point. I don't even think about that anymore, right? Like I think at the time it was, okay, that was not great, pretty bad look, but hopefully this is a learning experience, something that can be sort of taken and then processed and moved on from, and just kind of part of being a 22-year-old and figuring things out is having those little setbacks here and there. And, instead of that becoming a sore spot or a sign of things to come, instead of the injury kind of rendering him just kind of out of the team purview for the rest of the season, which it very easily could have. We've seen that before with guys who get hurt and get shut down, where they just kind of like, yeah, well, I'm not around, not my problem. We'll talk next year. Like that wasn't a thing. Scottie was there. Scottie was loud. He was vocal. And I think that is really encouraging, especially when you consider where things sat a year ago with Scottie Barnes, the transformation from the end of last season to now. Thoughts on that sort of Pokemon evolution, or three of them that we've seen with Scottie Barnes in the last 12 months alone?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was going to be tough to maintain linear growth coming off that Rookie of the Year campaign, and obviously he took his lumps in that second season. And it was going to be about how he bounced back from that and what he was going to take from it. And the first thing he spoke about in terms of wanting to improve last summer was his conditioning and getting to a level where he could give as much as he wanted to on both ends of the court, because he can be that impactful on both ends, right? And I think you look at some of the offensive strides. Obviously, the 3-point shot kind of faded as the season went on, but there was some overall, you would still say it was encouraging to see the growth from last season to this season. And then the biggest thing for me was the defense. I think, being put in positions where are advantageous to him, where he's in the back line. And if he's defending the perimeter, at least like he's defending more like-sized guys more often. That changed, I think, a bit right before the injury. And I think with the way the roster was, he was kind of given a bit more of what maybe we saw last season. But I do think for a large part of this season, we saw him in his best positions defensively, and that's protecting the rim. The way him and Yak were able to really protect that rim and help and deter opponents who were able to maybe get by Quickley or RJ and be there whenever they needed it. I think that was huge. And that's a form of leadership as well, right? And like showing you have their back on the court. And then, the way the playmaking came along, like you've just come to expect things from him that you wouldn't have a season ago. And so I think those are probably the three biggest things for me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that he followed through on sort of what he was talking about at the end of last year, I think, is the sort of thing that maybe it doesn't make me all that surprised that it's been sort of a steady uptick when it comes to Scottie over the last year or so. Like the conditioning thing actually being a thing that was then the first thing he talked about upon getting to the team this year. Was like, oh, okay, like maybe this guy does kind of back up what he's talking about. I think, yeah, man, like the sort of, we're going to look back at the leap he took this year. It obviously sucks that it got cut short by the injury and everything. But I think we're going to look back at this year as like a really transformative one for him, one that kind of laid the groundwork for this version of the team. Like this team does not have nearly the future or the upside if Scottie Barnes doesn't look like the player he looked like this season. If he looks like the player we all kind of thought he would coming into the year, I think it's a little bit less rosy, but he, I think, far surpassed everybody's expectations. And I think that's amazing. And then you blend in the learning from the mistakes, the, taking, lumps and trying to rectify them going forward. The talk about just sort of, like I mentioned, the Garrett Temple stuff and seemingly taking the leadership thing pretty seriously. He seems like a guy who now understands what's being asked of him, what the team sees for him, what the vision of the team is around. And that's the benefit of clarity, right? You didn't have that clarity before, to their detriment. Like that really sewered them for the first half of this season. Now they have it. Now Scottie Barnes knows where he sits exactly. And while I, wish things had gone differently with a certain star player and his departure, I do think that, the sort of upshot is, okay, like he knows it's his team now. He knows exactly what's being asked, and he can do everything in his power to get better at that, what that means, whether it's on the floor or off the court. It's encouraging stuff. I'm feeling a lot better about Scottie Barnes today than I was 12 months ago. I'll tell you that. Good times.
Does it make you feel worse? Or does it make you feel worse or better at the end of that final home game? Just seeing how cool like Pascal and Scottie are with each other.
Yeah, no, worse. Yeah, it sucks. Like, it could have worked. I still fully maintain. And RJ Barrett made a little comment too. I don't know if he meant anything by it, but like, yeah, we got to Toronto. I thought everything was working pretty well, and then like Pascal got traded, and we kind of had to learn it all over again. It's like, yeah, well, maybe they didn't have to do that, but what are you gonna do? Yeah.
We all love watching that team.
Yeah, it was those 3.5 games, 4 games. It was like the peak of my basketball watching for this entire year. It's pretty sweet. It's the new what if that I'll never stop thinking about and will see in my dreams night after night. I'm just gonna have that Warriors game on loop for the rest of time. Weeping. We'll come back on the other side, Big V, close it out with some parting shots and just sort of put a pin in a pretty miserable season overall that no one seems to be feeling all that miserable about. We'll get to that coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the single best place to play daily fantasy sports, especially now that it's playoff time in the NBA and, of course, the NHL as well. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 or more player stats in a given night and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey. Of course, you got the WNBA coming up soon. Baseball's going on as well, but those playoff sports, that's where it's at right now. Do it on America's #1 fantasy sports app. It's Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is the LOCKEDONNBA as the promo code when you download the app or go to prizepicks.com. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Wrapping things up here with Big V, Vivek Jacob from Sportsnet, from Raptors in 7, talking about media day at the end of the season, locker cleanouts, etc. Last day of school vibes. And I guess, we get to reflect a little bit on the season that was now, Big V. Not great. 25-57. We've covered it. The last couple months basically weren't basketball. Wasn't terribly fun. Hope to never see it again. Tanking is a scourge, and the NBA should be doing everything it can to stop this garbage from happening. Alas, the season's over, and I do think overall the vibes seem pretty upbeat. Everyone seems to know, like, hey, yeah, this year was a bummer, but there's better things that lie ahead. It does kind of feel like they can almost turn the page. Yeah, the lottery and the draft pick and all that stuff are still hanging out there for the next month, which I'm so excited to talk about. I'm really looking forward to litigating the draft pick for the next month. Preview of podcasts to come. Hopefully you're sensing the sarcasm in that tone. But, I do think for the most part, this can be kind of a turn the page type of day. I think the front office deserves a lot of heat for things and how they've been handled over the last year, 18 months, however you want to say. Maybe you go back to the Thad Young trade when it all began. I don't know. It's not gone super well. There have been missteps. There have been misreads of the market. There have been some successes. I think the OG for RJ and Quickley trade is an absolute home run. Nailed it. Incredible deal. The Kelly Olynyk trade, I think, was a really smart piece of business. The Kelly Olynyk Ochai Abazi trade. Sorry, buddy. I know you're the Ochai man in this podcast. But but there have been a lot of missteps. And I do think that with this season now in the books, we can begin to turn the page, give a clean slate even to the front office, if you will. Perhaps they've realized their wrongs with the moves they made this season, trying to correct them, et cetera. And there is some runway going forward here where things can be positive and progressive and, taking steps towards competitiveness once again. Is that also a feeling you're kind of sharing coming at it today as well, Big V? Or are you going to stew on the decisions of the last couple of years for much longer than 24 hours following the last game of the season?
I'm not going to stew, but I have a feeling of relief, in terms of where this team is at and knowing the direction and where things are headed. I do think that, seeing how this summer plays out is important in just fully evaluating what the front office has done over the past couple of years. And so that part of it, I am kind of sitting on. I think for the most part, you and I have been pretty patient in terms of waiting to see what the front office is doing over the last couple of years. And so there is going to be that point where we say, okay, this is what, more or less the full picture looks like. And we can pick at the things that they've just flat out done wrong. I mean, we've touched on Pascal a little bit. You think about all the deals Masai has done, going back to Carmelo Anthony, what he got for Bargnani, the list goes on. There's no way he is sitting in his office saying, "We nailed that Pascal deal."
Nope.
So, and those are the things that can change what your rebuild timeline looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's a player of that magnitude. And so those are the real ones that you have to nail. And he has been tremendous at getting them right over the course of his career. And he was probably due to screw one of them up. And so I think when you're evaluating the front office, we'll never have that alternate option of, hey, this is what a perfect deal would have looked like to compare with, right? And so this is what's in front of us, and we're able to embrace it and say, okay, you know what? We have the clarity that we've been looking for. But there is going to be that part of me that will be looking at this summer and just evaluating and saying, this could have looked better too.
Yeah. Like the in-season moves, I think, did set them up for next year to be promising, for them to have a team that makes sense around Scottie Barnes, all of that. But the last step is what goes down this summer. They have cap space. They have flexibility. They'll probably let you hear about it a whole bunch when they speak. Oh, we got the flexibility. We got it. You heard about the flexibility we have? It's our favorite player. Buy the jersey of flexibility. Like that's going to be a talking point surely coming out of the season. And it's all great. It's well and good to have flexibility. If you don't do something with it, then yeah, this whole sort of turn the page becomes a little bit less clean. It becomes a little less clear. And that's not to say that they can't be competitive next season. I think they can. I think they can probably be a play-in team next season, even just as currently constructed, if it's just the same team and they're healthy the whole season. Better than the Bulls, baby. Hashtag better than the Bulls. It's going to be a thing. It's going to be a rallying cry of the podcast. But for them to really kind of set themselves up on a track where, okay, like they're going to try to get back to the places they've been before. Like they have to nail this offseason. Let me ask you, Big V, like, what do you think is the single most important thing to nail this summer?
Not conveying the pick.
Wait, you don't want them to convey the pick, or you want them to?
No. I mean, I guess I was wording it wrong. Yeah.
Right. Conveying the pick is number one. Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking the language, brother.
Yeah.
Grease those, put those cold envelopes in the lottery, whatever the hell, and make sure that they do, like, just have someone jump you. Get the nets to jump you or whatever. It's you can like grease some palms, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you were to look at the most important thing, it probably goes beyond transactions. You probably look at the roster and say, hey, what are the next stages of development for a host of individual players, and what can that look like by next season? I think that is probably what I'd say is the most important thing. And so with Scottie, it's going to be continuing to improve that 3-point shot. It's going to be what the chemistry with IQ looks like at the start of next season, and working on that. RJ becoming a better defender. Those are the things that I would look at and say are more important than anything else, because transactionally, I'm not sure there's much that can be done. Like I wouldn't put, a potential free agent signing above any of that.
Yeah. I would say number one thing to not screw up this summer is don't sign a really bad free agent contract just because you have theoretical cap space, please. Not feeling that. I think, for me, the things to try to nail this summer, like the Gary Bruce thing, I feel like they're very much connected because they are the pathway to having cap flexibility, right? As you renounce Gary, you decline Bruce, and then all of a sudden you got a little bit of money to play with. Not the full amount of money because they signed Kelly Olynyk, but like they'll have some money to work with. How they figure that out versus just like keeping those two guys around, which I think at this point is probably the best move, just asset wise. If you can retain Gary and keep Bruce around, to either trade him at the deadline or take him into next summer and get the cap relief, or bring him back on a smaller deal, whatever. I think that's probably right now, just kind of looking 10,000 feet up at the landscape, probably the best move. But that said, like, the playoffs have a way of shaking dudes loose and, setting up the table for what the offseason is going to look like. So we probably don't actually know what the offseason is going to really look like just yet, what kind of options might be out there. But yeah, how they turn those Gary and Bruce current roster spots into whatever those roster spots are going to be next year. I think they got to nail that because those are important players right now to the team and figure to be important pieces of rotation going forward if new players are occupying those slots in the rotation and the sort of hierarchy of the team. So there's that. Find a
just
wing.
quickly.
Yeah,
quickly, I will say on Gary, with the news that trickled out today saying that Grayson Allen's getting a contract extension for 4 years, $70 million. I think that does set the market a little bit. And, I think it's safe to say there's no way Gary would get that. And so, is he somewhere closer to the 4-year, $50 million range? Are you ideally looking for a shorter team deal because you don't want to make that type of commitment to him and you're looking more at like a 2-year, 3-year window? That's another thing. But, annually, if you look at someone like Grayson Allen getting 18, you'd like to think, Gary probably slots in maybe in that like 12 to 14 range.
Kind of 15 high end probably.
Yeah.
Like the Grayson Allen, I think they're probably like pretty comparable players. Grayson Allen obviously a better playmaker, but I also think a lot of Grayson Allen's numbers are just kind of a factor of, he plays with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, which is going to have a way of boosting up your metrics.
That's fair. I mean, Grayson's also a flat out better defender.
Yeah, that's fair enough too. And I'm sure plenty of people will look at that contract and say, hey, like he's a good player. The Raptors should have just taken him back for Fred last year. I still, am fine not having to root for Grayson Allen on my basketball team. Just like personally, I'm fine with it. But I can, hear that argument if you're upset about it now, considering what Grayson Allen's done. But yeah, I think, sub Grayson Allen money is what Gary's going to be looking at. And I think that's probably fine kind of wherever it ends up. Maybe you don't want to put the 16, 17 level, but I also don't know if that'd be like a killer or anything like that. He was pretty good this year, especially in the starting lineup. Like he was very effective and, the starters with him in there with the guys who were actually on the team. It's a damn good lineup for however fleeting a stretch they were able to play with one another. That feels like a good place to leave this for now, Big V. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the biggest offseason questions facing your Toronto Raptors. We'll probably start doing that tomorrow on the podcast. We got draft stuff coming up later in the week as well, as our pal Richard Stamen from Locked On NBA Big Board is going to pop by. And we're also going to do the good, the bad, and the full season edition. Multiple episodes covering good stuff, bad stuff, stuff from this Raptors year. You have all that to look forward to coming up in the days and weeks ahead. Big V, anything you want to promote for the good people out there before we get out of here?
Usual stuff. I will actually have play-in previews for Sportsnet coming up soon. I will be doing the West play-in preview, so you can check that out. And over at Raptors in 7, I will probably have takeaways from the end of season pressers, so you can look out for that. And you can follow it all on Twitter at Vivek Jacob.
Amazing. Go do all that. Find me at Woodley Sean. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciated when you support the show. However you support the show. We'll be back again tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks so much for hanging. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.